At 7:40 a.m. on August 4, 2025, the South China Sea was already simmering with tension. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, its pale light glinting off rolling waves, when a U.S. Navy A-18 Super Hornet sliced through the sky, 65 miles east of Taiwan. Inside the cockpit, everything looked routine: endless ocean, thin cloud cover, heat shimmering across the canopy. Then it hit. A sharp, piercing tone screamed through the pilot's headset, unmistakable and urgent. Enemy radar lock, not a passive scan. A hard, fire control lock. Someone had painted him. The warning lights flashed red as the system confirmed the threat. A Chinese J-16 flanker was closing fast, pushing more than 500 knots. This wasn't an escort or a shadow. This was targeting. The pilot reacted instantly, snapping the Hornet into a violent left brake. G-forces slammed into his chest as the threat receiver held again. Weapons-grade lock confirmed. He knew what that meant. At any second, the J-16 could fire. No warning, no radio calls, just a missile streaking through the sky. Countermeasures armed, flares ready. The Hornet dropped low, skimming just 300 feet above the waves. The ECM suite hummed to life, flooding the air with jamming signals. The ocean blurred beneath him as he tore forward at near supersonic speed. This wasn't a drill. This was real. One mistake here could spark something far bigger than a single aircraft. He yanked the jet hard again, releasing brilliant magnesium flares that burned behind him like miniature suns. Designed to fool heat-seeking missiles, they flared violently in the morning sky, but the lock held. The J-16 kept pressing in, an advanced twin-engine fighter, packed with long-range radar and armed with PL-12 and PL-15 missiles, built for moments exactly like this, intimidation without a single word spoken. The range collapsed fast, 40 nautical miles, less than a minute from weapons release. Inside the American cockpit, there was no chatter, no calls for backup, just controlled breathing and the steady growl of engines. He appeared alone, but he wasn't. 30 seconds earlier, a second Super Hornet had launched from the same carrier strike group. Now it ghosted in from behind, staying outside the J-16's radar cone, a textbook flanking maneuver. If the Chinese pilot fired, he wouldn't be fighting one aircraft, he'd be fighting two. Then, suddenly, the tone vanished, the radar lock dropped, the J-16 broke hard to the right, turning back toward Chinese-controlled airspace. No shots fired, no radio calls, no explanation. Just a silent withdrawal. The American jets were formed, holding steady in international airspace. Calm, professional, fully alert. The carrier strike group sat 100 miles to the west, with support still 12 minutes away. At this altitude, in this theater, 12 minutes might as well be 12 years. Today, the Chinese fighter backed off. Tomorrow, it might not. Because this wasn't an isolated incident. Between 2014 and 2024, more than 300 close encounters had been recorded between Chinese and Western aircraft over the South China Sea. Some were professional intercepts, many were not, and every one carried the risk of catastrophe. In May 2023, a Chinese J-16 crossed so close in front of a U.S. RC-135 surveillance aircraft that turbulence rocked it violently. Just 20 feet separated them. The Pentagon called it dangerously aggressive. Beijing called it routine. In October 2022, a Canadian CP-1 for Aurora was intercepted 5 times in a single mission. Chinese fighters fired flares directly across its nose and jammed its radar. Earlier that year, an Australian P-8 Poseidon nearly lost an engine when a Chinese fighter dumped aluminum chaff into its flight path. The aircraft survived only because its crew reacted instantly. These were not accidents. They were calculated moves. Gray's own tactics designed to test limits, probe resolve, and assert control over contested skies. A dangerous game played between peace and open war, where one miscalculation could bring everything crashing down. And here's the most dangerous part. None of these incidents led to resolution. No hotlines activated. No agreements signed, no lessons learned, just a reset until the next confrontation. So, when a U.S. pilot heard a radar lock warning on August 4, 2025, it wasn't an anomaly. It was the new normal, and the mechanics were chillingly simple. When the Hornet's radar warning receiver lit up, it meant the J-16 had switched from passive search to full tracking. A narrow beam locked onto his position, speed, and heading with deadly precision. The J-16's phased array radar could track multiple targets with accuracy down to mere meters. From that point, launching a missile was a single button press away. A PL-15 could cover 200 kilometers in under 70 seconds at Mach 4. That was all the time a pilot had. So the American did exactly what doctrine demanded: break line of sight, deploy countermeasures, jam the signal, keep moving. Flares burned, ECM systems flooded the sky with false targets. And behind the J-16, unseen and silent, the second Hornet gathered data waiting. That balanced strength, without firing first, is what kept the world from tipping over the edge. The problem is time. From the instant a radar lock is established, the window to a missile launch can be less than 4 seconds. For seconds to decide whether it's a bluff or an act of war. For seconds to choose restraint or retaliation. For seconds that could pull the world's two most powerful militaries into open conflict. It wouldn't be the first time. On April 1, 2001, a U.S. Navy EP-3 surveillance aircraft was flying a routine mission near Hainan Island when 2 Chinese J-8 interceptors moved in. One pilot pushed it close. At over 300 knots, the fighter collided with the EP-3's wing. The J-8 disintegrated instantly, killing its pilot. The American aircraft barely survived, making an emergency landing on Chinese territory. Its 24 crew members were detained and interrogated for 11 days while the aircraft was dismantled for intelligence. The incident shook the world and changed everything. After Hainan, Chinese intercepts grew sharper, riskier, more aggressive. Every encounter became a test of nerve and resolve. August 4, 2025, was cut from the same cloth. Another calculated risk, another American pilot forced to gamble on restraint. No one pulled the trigger, but they could have. Had the Chinese pilot stayed on course, a Place-15 missile would have left its rail, climbing high before diving toward the Hornet at 4 times the speed of sound. Even with flares, jamming, and every evasive maneuver available, survival would have been a coin toss. Less than 90 seconds to live. The second Super Hornet, now perfectly positioned, would have been cleared to retaliate, understanding rules of engagement. An AIM-120 ram would streak from its wing, hunting the J-16 in under 45 seconds. And it wouldn't stop there. Both aircraft belonged to carrier strike groups. AWACS aircraft, cruisers, and destroyers were already watching the sky. One engagement would have triggered alarms across the entire theater. Aegis cruisers would snap their SPY-1 radars onto every contact. Combat air patrols would scramble. Submarines would move into firing positions. Within minutes, the South China Sea would look like an active war zone. In Beijing and Washington, crisis rooms would ignite. Phones would ring. Statements would be drafted. But once blood is spilled, no amount of diplomacy can rewind the tape. There is no playbook for de-escalating a shoot-down between nuclear powers, only guesswork, and hope that someone blinks before escalation carries everyone over the edge. That's why August 4th matters, because the South China Sea ain't just water. It's one of the most dangerous flashpoints on Earth. Beijing claims nearly all of it, even waters international law assigns to Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and the global commons. To enforce those claims, China has built islands from scratch, arming them with runways, radars, missile batteries, and constant patrols. In 2016, the Hague Tribunal ruled those claims legally invalid. China enforces them anyway. Right at the center sits Taiwan, just 100 miles off the mainland coast. For Beijing, it's a breakaway province that must be reclaimed. For Washington, it's a partner, a strategic bulwark, and a line worth defending. U.S. freedom of navigation patrols exist to assert international rights in these skies. But every patrol carries the same risk the Hornet faced that morning. Chinese fighters lock on, shadow, harass, each time, the gap between warning and war narrows. The stakes could not be higher. More than $3 to $4 trillion in global trade flows through this corridor every year. Oil tankers, container ships, and undersea fiber optic cables all converge here. A conflict wouldn't stay regional, it would slam the global economy into chaos overnight. Every radar lock, every warning tone is a reminder that the future of half the world's economy hangs on decisions measured in seconds. August 4th was just one encounter. Zoom out, and the picture is unmistakable. The United States and China are locked in strategic competition, neither war nor peace, but something far more unstable. The U.S. Navy still commands unmatched global reach. But the People's Liberation Army Navy is expanding faster than any fleet in modern history, rolling out new carriers, fighters, cyber units, and space capabilities. And Beijing is no longer subtle. Radar locks are messages without words daring the United States to blink. Washington's message is just as clear. Its aircraft will fly wherever international law allows. Neither side wants war. Both act as if it could come tomorrow. That's the danger. Beijing sees U.S. patrols as provocation. Washington sees Chinese radar locks as threats. And without hotlines, without agreed intercept rules, without mutual trust, the only thing preventing catastrophe is the judgment of pilots hurtling toward each other at supersonic speed. On August 4th, two pilots faced that moment. One locked on, one held the line, one disengaged. Next time, the choice may be different. And once a missile leaves the rail, there's no way to know how far the fire will spread. These aren't exercises. These are real missions, real weapons, real consequences. Every close pass, every lock, every flare thins the margin for error. One day soon, not firing may no longer be the boldest move of all.